Hello, everyone. I'm Tharwat Mansour. I'm a board member in the Franco British Network. The Franco British Network is a nonprofit organization in France with the objective of helping British people resident in France or planning to move in the near future and helping them overcoming their daily challenges. Today, I'm doing a chat FVN, and it's a very important topic. I know many of our followers requested this, and the topic is about inheritance law in France. And for this, I'm having with me Mr. Christophe Dutertre. Thankfully, we're very glad to have you with us, Mr. Christophe.
Yep.
Welcome to this chat.
Welcome. Thank you very much.
Christophe is a lawyer with a diploma as notaire practicing in UK. He also has a diploma in European notarial law, and he has a STAB certificate in international succession and probate. So he's going to give us very valuable information today about this topic. We start with the overall general question. Christophe, what can you tell us main things about the inheritance law in France for the people who are about to come from UK or for people who are British resident in France? What should they know and what they should be aware of related to this topic?
Right. Succession in France is quite a large and vast topic, mainly because France has a very, very specific succession law, which is quite genuine and quite different from the other countries. There are quite a few points that someone should consider before they move to France, or even when they have already moved to France and forgot about, I would say, French law. So if we're only concentrating on inheritance, I think when you decide to move to a country such as France, if you have to make sure you understand the French inheritance law, the French legislation, and how moving to a country will affect basically your estate planning, the distribution of your assets to your wife, to your husband, to your children. You also have to take into consideration the fact that maybe you are not in your first marriage. You've got several marriages with different children from previous marriages. Do you still speak to your previous children or not? We often have cases where clients move to a country and they say, oh, I would like, British expat mainly, I would like to transfer everything to my wife or my husband, and I want to disinherit my children because I haven't talked to them for a while, or under English law, I can. Being a French resident, moving to France, or if I want to move to France, can I do the same? So that's really the first point they need to bear in mind. If I move to another country, basically, can I replicate what I would have done in the country where I reside now, which could be England? If I am in France, what can I do to maybe try and mitigate inheritance law and see if I can transfer my assets to whoever I want? So that's really the first point that someone should consider before they move to France, or if they are in France, what did I do wrong, or what did I not consider before moving to France? So that's something we can discuss a little bit. The second point, when you want to move to a country or you are in a different country, such as France, for inheritance purposes, I would say, did I keep some assets in my original country? Do you still have assets? Do I still have assets in England, for example? And how is it going to affect my situation as a French resident? Will my English assets be governed by French law in terms of inheritance law? There is also a point to consider, which would be inheritance tax. Will my UK assets also be part of my French tax estate? So that's something that people should also bear in mind, because we have so many expats who they live in England, but some of them, they live in England, they move to France, and they also have assets in Spain, for example. How is it going to affect the distribution of the assets to, again, my spouse or the children? So knowing how to distribute your assets is quite important. And the last point that I think it's important when you want to move to France, or if you are in France, is obviously the repartition of your asset, the distribution to your beneficiaries. Do I have a will in place? I had a will when I was in England. is this will still valid in France? Can I use it? Or do I need to change it because I'm in a country where the legislation is completely different? So that's, to me, that's really the main 3 points that I think someone should be aware of before moving to France, or if they recently moved to France and I would say forgot about inheritance. I have to say, when someone moves to France, the first thing they have in mind is income tax. It's more their income, the health, and inheritance. It's something that comes really at the time, or when they, I have to say, when we had COVID a few years ago, suddenly, I would say when COVID arrived, I had an increase of inquiries regarding wills. You say people were basically scared of dying and say, oh, I don't have a will. I'm in France. I don't have a will. What shall I do? I had a will in England made 10, 20 years ago. Are they still valid? Maybe, maybe not. So a lot of people think about their daily needs, but on the long term, they also need to think about inheritance, which is quite important.
Mm-hmm.
So if we come back to maybe the first point is the legislation in France. Obviously, French law is quite different from English law. In England, it's governed by the common law. You basically do whatever you want. You can, if you want to disinherit your children, you are really free to do so. There are some legislation which apply in England to provide children with some recourses. I would say it's probably quite limited. In France, we've got this concept of forced heirship. Forced heirship means basically under French law, you should not be able to disinherit your children, whether you like them or not. If you take the example of the famous cases like Jean-Michel Jarre, which was a singer, the son, Johnny Hallyday, you can say it triggers a lot of conflict between the surviving spouse and the children. And the fact that Johnny Hallyday made a will to say, I would like to basically transfer everything to my wife and my 2 daughters. And he left out his 2 previous children from previous marriages. You can't do that. You can't do that. But on the other hand, maybe you can. And maybe you can try to disinherit or try to adapt how you would like your estate to be distributed by applying a different legislation. Applying a different legislation means that you may, as a British citizen, I'm really talking for our expat community as a British citizen, maybe you could try to choose English law to deal with the settlement of your estate. In 2015, the European succession law came into force in France, enabling a person to change the rules, basically in France, and choose a different legislation. Different legislation being legislation of your nationality. Nationality means if you have several nationalities, you can choose one of them. I know some British people also have an Irish passport, for example, or I don't know, a Canadian or US passport, because they are married to someone else. So you can choose the law of one of your nationalities. The European succession law allows you to do so. So from 2015, English expats living in France or deciding to move to France could say, okay, I may not want my children to inherit, or not now. What can I do? It's easy. You have a will, you choose English law, you change the rules, you change the legislation that will apply to the settlement of your estate. And that was perfect for English expat, for US expat, for anyone who was basically governed by common law. However, this freedom of choosing a legislation came to an end, I would say, in a way, for British expat in 2021, when the French government decided to reintroduce forced heirship for the children. And since 2021, the 1st November 2021, the French government introduced in the French Civil Code an article 913.1, 2, and 3, change the article to actually allow a person who was disinherited to apply the forced heirship over the French-based assets. So in practice, what it means that you are a British couple, you move to France, let's say in 2016, to give you an example of how the law works at the moment. So you are a British couple. You moved to France in 2016. One of the spouse has one child from a previous marriage, hasn't talked to this child for 20 years. 2016, this person will make a will. I would like English law to apply, pursuant the European succession law, and basically I want to disinherit my son or my daughter. Perfect, you can do it. However, in 2021, the French government reintroduced that legislation. So now that will, if we apply that will, the child who was disinherited can come back to basically the notary who will be in charge with the settlement of the estate to say, well, hold on, I think now I've got some legal right and I've got the right to claim my share over my deceased parents' estate, but the share that you can claim will only be over the French-based assets. So this legislation caused a lot of problems for a lot of British people who live in France, who are in this situation, who thought that they could move to France without any problem, thinking that I don't have to worry about my estate. I don't have to worry about a child that I haven't talked to for many, many years. I can disinherit him or her. Now it's not the case. It's no longer possible. So that is one of the main change that we had in 2021 regarding inheritance law. So that's a new article. So obviously it has been challenged. It's been challenged at the European Commission. I think there was a complaint made to the European Commission to try to ban that article and to punish France. How long is it going to take for the European Commission to look at it, to decide that France is wrong, that this article should be removed? We don't know. We don't know. However, something that is fairly new, and again, it's in a pipeline, so it's not going to come up in the next couple of months. With international law being part of the society now, the movement of freedom and having so many foreigners in every country, France would like to create international private law act. It's like we've got the Code Civil, would like to create international law code. It's been drafted. There are a couple of articles which I think may change the rules, may change this legislation that came into force in 2021. And one of the proposals, from what I read, one of the proposal is that this Article 913 might be abolished, no longer exist, and instead in this new international code, we may have an article that provides that a child could claim a share over his or her parents' estate only if the child can prove that he is in a financial difficulty. So we are no longer in a position where a child who is completely estranged from his father, a child who is, let's say, a millionaire, who could say, just to annoy the surviving spouse, I'm going to claim my share over the estate because I'm my father's son. Now, hopefully in the future, with this introduction of this international code, the son will have to prove that he's in a financial difficulty and he actually needs his share from his father's estate. That's probably a long way before it happens, but that's a little hope with this legislation that was in place. So that's something that it's very important. Is you move to a country, you really need to be aware of the legislation, what you can or you can't do. I would say a few clients who move to France, they have not yet bought a property in France, or they have not yet moved their assets to France. And I think it's very important at that stage, before we decide to move to France or relocate to France, if we have to buy a property, how do we buy it? Make sure you buy it in a such way that maybe the child that you don't want to inherit, if it's not a common child, will not be entitled to a share of that property because it will not belong to his or her parents. If you have some liquidities in the UK, maybe keep the liquidities in the UK because the claim that the child would have over the estate is only on the French-based assets. So even if the rules are quite complex to determine the share, at least the assets in the UK, I would say they should be protected. So a lot of things to consider before you move to France. Or if you are in France, how can I adapt or can I maybe change the title deed? If you bought a property in joint name, you felt that, excuse me, you could disinherit a child and you can't anymore. What can I do? Maybe to reduce as much as possible what I own, my estate from when I die. So there are several aspects to really discuss with a legal expert before you move to France, or if you are already in France, to understand the process. So that's probably the first part of the advice that a legal advisor will give to someone wanting to relocate to France. The second point, which I mentioned earlier, is do I retain assets in the UK or not? Again, if you retain assets in the UK, to me, we are not really talking about inheritance law, but more talking about inheritance tax now, which is obviously a different topic. If I retain assets in the UK, we just saw that I should be able to transfer them to whoever I want. I should be able to disinherit my child over the UK assets because they're not French-based assets. So I should be free to dispose of them to whoever I want. But it doesn't mean that those assets will only be governed by English law in terms of tax. And that's a point that is quite important because we have often a lot of inquiries and a lot of British expats who may be confused, which is normal because it's complex. And they say, okay, I will choose English law. So everything will be governed by English law, including English tax, and nothing will be taxed in France, which is wrong. Unfortunately, it's wrong. If you are a French tax resident, your worldwide assets will be taxed in France. Between spouses, there is no tax, so it doesn't really matter if you transfer everything to your spouse. But if in your will you've got liquidities in the UK and you say, well, my wife or my husband will have most of it, but maybe I will give a few thousand, 10, 20 or 30,000 to a niece or a nephew, for example, because I like them. Well, the niece or nephew may not be taxed in the UK because it will be below a tax threshold if the assets are taxable in the UK, but they will definitely be taxed in France. The assets will definitely be part of the taxable assets in France. So again, retaining assets in the UK, yes, that's a good idea if you want to protect your surviving spouse. If you would like those assets to pass to someone else, just be careful because there could be some tax implication in France. Because those assets will not only be taxed in the UK, if they are taxable in the UK, but they will definitely be taxed in France. So that's something, again, second point, that retaining assets in the UK, yes, but at what cost? I have to be very, very careful. And the last point which I mentioned regarding points to consider when you move to France is obviously to have a will in place. I think we may have some question and answer regarding wills and validity of wills. But to me, I would say, yes, as a French person living in England, I now realize, probably more than when I was working in France with this French mind, that having a will, I was having a will sometime, even if it's to confirm what the law says, it's useful. It's useful to have a will, especially for a British expat living in France, because you are in a different country. A notaire may not be familiar with English law. A notaire may see someone who is not French. So what legislation do I apply? How do I deal with the estate? Do I do it under French law or under English law? Having a will in place may actually answer all those questions and make life easier for a notaire to say, okay, I've got a will. I just have to apply the will, providing that it is drafted correctly. So having a will, yes, it's important for civil purposes, but also for tax purposes. It could be important to put some clauses in your will to make sure that you protect the surviving spouse, but sometimes you also protect the children. So I think that's the point that I would probably consider. I would advise a client before they move to France, or if they just move to France, to make sure they understand the system and then see case by case how to adapt their situation.
Okay, that was very extensive, but actually very important and very clear. So thank you for this. Were there any changes at the beginning of 2025, or do you anticipate any changes in inheritance law in France in this coming year?
Changes in early 2025, not I am aware of. Obviously, we've got this international act, but I don't think it will be set up until probably a few years, I think. I mean, it took several years for Monaco to introduce their international act, so I don't think it will be done this year. It will take time in France. In terms of inheritance law, no. There was a court case which was a court case in 2024, not 2025, so 2024 regarding basically the right for a person to be able to choose the law that he or she would like to choose to settle the estate, which contradict a little bit the Article 913. But again, it's a court case. It's not basically the law. It's really a court case, and you apply a court case when you have to go to court. You take a precedent. So in terms of a change which will come from the government, in terms of inheritance law, there is nothing at the moment that I'm aware of. Inheritance tax, we hoped a couple of years ago that the French government will change the tax system, will be a little bit more generous in terms of gift, in terms of succession. The bill has never been voted. There has been a couple of changes this year, which are very limited, I think, to cases. Personally, I don't think that there would be major changes in terms of the law. In terms of tax, hopefully there will be some changes after the presidential election.
Mm-hmm.
As always, when there is an election, there are promises by every party. Hopefully this time they will actually put in place what they promise, and they will really review entirely the tax system in France, because it doesn't reflect the society where we live. To me, having 100,000 euros tax threshold for a child, unless you've got 5 or 6 children, which give a large envelope, if you have one child, a couple with one child having a property, which is what, I don't know, I would say the average price that I would see is about between 200 and 400,000 euros, plus some savings. Yes, a child will have to pay tax when he inherits from his father or his mother. And I think they should increase that. 100,000 euros, it's not enough. There are some other sources of income for the government, not basically tax people who work all their life, try to transfer or distribute their assets to their children, and you tax them. Hopefully it will change. I really hope that it's going to change at some point, because the last changes were over 15 years ago, I think. So I hope so.
Okay. So thank you so much, Christophe, for being with us today. So stay tuned. Thank you so much. And to another chat at the end session.